Shalom Aleichem, welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening to our virtual theater for this evening's program, Curating Yiddish Culture with David Mazower. Before we get started, a few housekeeping details to mention. Your audio and your video will be off throughout this evening's program. You may send us your questions via the question panel, usually located at the lower right of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from comments so we can try to get to all of the questions this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and this evening's presenter, David Mazower. David is the Yiddish Book Center's research bibliographer and the chief curator and writer of the center's groundbreaking permanent exhibition, Yiddish, A Global Culture. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
And turning the mic
right.
over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us. So I will speak for about half an hour or 40 minutes max, and then we'll have some time for questions. And yeah, it's really an opportunity to talk you through, introduce you to some of the challenges, some of the principles that underpinned how we went about putting this large project together and creating really the world's first museum of modern Yiddish culture, or Yiddish culture, modern or otherwise, which is kind of a sobering thought. You know, why hasn't it been done before? So, you know, we might get into that. So that was in a way a starting point. You know, there are no precedents, so we have a complete blank canvas when we set out in 2018. This took 5 years. It opened in October last year, October 2023. And it was, you know, it was epic in many ways. And so in a way, the first decision was the framing of the overall subject, Yiddish, a global culture. That may seem evident when you come here and you see what we've put on the walls and in the cases and in the videos and audio, but it's not necessarily evident. We actually started out talking about an exhibition about Yiddish in America. So that quickly spread to become a sort of global concept. And I guess the next question was really, was it going to be chronological or thematic? And for a whole bunch of reasons, we decided it had to be thematic, really. So it's a thematic display. What is the time frame? That settled on being roughly 1860 to the present day. That's the sort of modern period that we take as our canvas. So those were the sort of big early framing decisions. And then you get the more interesting questions in a way. You know, what's the message? What are we trying to tell people? What is interesting about this whole subject? What do you need to give people by way of background knowledge that they may not come here with? It has to appeal to the widest possible audience, obviously. And as with, I guess, most big exhibitions, and this one has over 1,000 images, objects, books, and so on, the question rapidly became not what to put in so much as what to leave out. But that, for us, is a very particular challenge, as we will come on to. So maybe Lisa is very kindly going to flip over the slides for us. I should say that Lisa, as well as being our host tonight, you are and were the project director of this whole enterprise, so firmly involved in every respect. So let's start out with a picture of the Yiddish Book Center. For those of you who've been here, you will know that we sit inside an apple orchard. We have a really gorgeous, beautiful, stunning landmark building created in the 1990s, but never intended to be a museum, to be an exhibition space, really. It was intended as a repository for books. So Lisa, whenever you're able to bring the presentation up, we'll look at the picture of the center, which was designed really inspired by wooden shtetl architecture from Poland and Eastern Europe. There we go. So familiar to those of you who've been here. A set of pavilions from the outside in this beautiful space. That's the entry bridge in the middle with the pointed opening. You sort of walk in over a short bridge and you get into the center. And Lisa, the next one, please. And then you find yourself in this cavernous, light-filled, beautiful space. And this is how it would have looked before October last year. So what you see here is the main repository space filled with books, thousands, tens of thousands of used, donated books. These are duplicates that we have available for sale. And to the right, you see those windows, which shows you the view out to the apple orchard at the back of the building. And then on the upper right, you can see the entryway into our small theater. And this is how it looked for many, many years with the colorful Aleph-Base alphabet banners marching along that central walkway designed by Ben Shahn. And then next one, Lisa, please. And this is what we did to it last summer. And this was itself epic. We cleared everything out of the space in the course of several weeks after the Yidstock Music Festival. And this is how it looked in, I guess, August 2023. Why did we do this? Well, it became clear at a somewhat late stage in this whole process that the only way we would get power to the audio and video where we needed it was to take up the carpet, channel the concrete floor underneath, put back a new carpet as it turned out, and then put everything back, including the exhibition. So this is August and we opened in October. So it was frenzied and nail biting, but we did it. And it was kind of, crazy fun, as these things are. So the next one, please. So moving on to the sort of first big decision, which is really what were the key elements, of this culture. So we know what Yiddish is. We decided we knew what the modern part of the subject was. We knew what the global part was, but what about the culture part? Culture is, elastic, a piece of string. It's the main things we think of, literature, theater, and the rest, but it's obviously a broader set of how people live, how people think, how people interact, how people create community, all those things which were a big part of the Yiddish world and indeed any culture, were sort of bubbling along in the background as we thought through this whole process. So really, in our minds, we settled on 5 big subject areas. The first of which was theater. Well, there's no first or last, but anyway, here we are with theater. So the subject really of the exhibition as a whole is the way in which and the moment, the era in which Yiddish becomes a mass culture, in which it becomes visible, in which it takes over public spaces in a way that we've almost entirely lost sight of and really find it hard to reimagine, but of course was extremely familiar to our grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and so on. And theater is absolutely front and center of that wider aspect of Yiddish culture, enormous theater posters all over the shops and streets in Jewish districts. A mass form of entertainment, an absolute craze from the moment it sort of breaks out into the open in the 1870s. So here are a couple of really beautiful images in the theater section of the exhibit. That is Esther Naroslavska on the left of your screen as Shalamis in the play by Goldfaden, Avram Goldfaden, and on the right is a company pioneering Yiddish theater in Jaffa, Palestine in around 1908. An absolutely gorgeous, crazy, wacky image with these homespun costumes, and possibly the first ever picture of Yiddish theater in pre-state Palestine in that time. And that it was a big part of the thinking was to try and find images like this, which weren't widely known or perhaps had never been seen, like the one on the right. The one on the left comes from the YIVO Institute, which was a prime source for us. All right, so that's theater. So then next is literature, obviously. And who is this? This is the writer on the right, Aliza Greenblatt, a familiar name perhaps to some of you, born 1885, came to America in 1900 as a teenager, an activist first and a writer second. She is represented in the exhibition not by this photograph on the right, but by a book of hers called In Seagate by Nyam, In Seagate at the Sea. And had I had the photograph on the left, which is Aliza Greenblatt as a much younger woman, in time for the exhibition, I would have really struggled and found a way, tried to find a way to put it in, but that only came afterwards from the family for another purpose. But it's kind of sums up an essential part of the thinking throughout this whole process, which is to kind of pivot away from this idea of Yiddish as something predominantly old, elderly, backward-looking, of the old country, of the old era, to something that's full of youthful energy, that's forward-looking, that is created predominantly by young people, which is the truth, which is the way the literature and the theater and music and so on happened and unfolded. So, okay, so we have literature, and then next we have music, and these racks of old original vintage sheet music have always been here at the center. We built onto them with these pictures. You can just see an iPad on the left of the screen. We curated playlists. Music is such a big part of modern Yiddish culture throughout and still today. Wonderful pictures. I'll just point out the guy with a wind-up gramophone in the middle, a Warsaw courtyard guy of the early 20th century, photoed by Menachem Kipnis, wonderful photographer, folklorist, collector, a very well-known figure in pre-war Warsaw. So a whole range of modern, less modern pictures representing Yiddish music. That's the third big sort of pillar of this the way we frame the subject. And then next, fourthly, the press. So the Yiddish press, voluminous, extraordinary. The Jewish Daily Forwards is outselling the New York Times in its heyday. It's forming public opinion, it's reflecting opinion and reflecting world events back to its readers. It's a really central part of the story. So we have a big section on the Yiddish press. This is a photograph of a bunch of London Bundists celebrating the launch of their newspaper, Die Neue Zeit, the New Times, probably in Epping Forest on the fringes of London. I love this photo. It's also from YIVO. They're so well turned out. It's such a sort of big event. The fact that, you know, they're launching, a photographer would be there. It's families, it's children. You can see the array of hats at the back. You can see the guy right in the middle with his sort of Russian type embroidered shirt and his cloth cap. And actually, today I just realized for the first time that I'm pretty sure the guy in the front with the straw boater is Morris Meyer. So for any of you knowledgeable and interested in London Yiddish stuff, Meyer is a key figure, one of the founding editors of the newspaper and a very influential newspaper editor, journalist, writer, activist in London through the decades. And that, I'm pretty sure, is him with the watch chain. So the press, okay, and next, allied to the press is politics. So this is a group of women leading the strikers in Janowski's cigarette factory in Bialystok at the turn of the century. So politics is really threaded through the exhibit as the sort of fifth kind of big pillar. And this is a scene from our introductory mural. All right, and then let's go to the next. So that's the sort of background in a sense. So now, how did we think about you know, what you're going to see when you come here? how to select it. And maybe surprisingly and maybe counterintuitively, the starting point is often for an exhibition not so much the writer, the actor, the book, the artifact, but the impact, the color, the scale, that sort of visceral connection that you have to give people when they come to an exhibition. Think of any exhibition that you remember, and you probably remember some remarkable object or an incredibly emotional story. So that, you know, it's as a scholar, as a writer, you maybe start from the opposite point of view with words and chapters and the structure of your story. But for an exhibition like this, we started often with just beautiful, remarkable, impactful things. And an early decision was that we were going to replace those Aleph-based banners with Yiddish book covers, book and journal covers, colorful, beautiful, modernist, remarkable covers. And this is Lisa hiding behind a bissel Rachillis, a little bit of gossip, and that is Ollie, our building supervisor, holding up die Ballade von Kindercamp, the Ballad of a Children's Camp. These are both from the 1920s. They're two of my absolutely favorite covers. And they, in common with a whole bunch of others, as we'll see on the next slide, now march down through that central repository and just create that sort of sense of welcoming, colorful, you know, design-filled, interest-filled space as you come in. That is my colleague Caleb with his back to us, taking a tour. And up above is Hamish, a mid-20s Berlin journal of sort of general Jewish politics and literature and so on. And we slimmed down the number of books, but we still have about 30,000 books on the metal shelves all around, which, you know, are at the heart of the center's history, its mission. They're symbolic, maybe for some people who come here and really can't understand or read them, but they pack an incredible punch. So they obviously had to stay, and the exhibition weaves its way around and sort of in conversation with them. All right, next. So again, in terms of sort of color and scale and impact, we have this 60-foot mural that is in a way the starting point as you come into the big space. This is the access ramp. And this was a commission. The artist is Martin Hacker, a German commercial artist. And this cements the idea of Yiddish as a global culture and of, you know, beyond that, of the idea of Yiddish land, this sort of coherent civilization. That's a term, Yiddish land is a term that really becomes current in the 1930s. It's a sort of late term in terms of the span of the subject, and it has a specific meaning or set of meanings. It's really something that intellectuals and journalists and activists start using to describe this very interconnected, very sort of networked culture at the moment that they perceive it's really most vulnerable, which is the 1930s. So there are about 35 scenes. That's a bookstore in Cape Town, the Yellow Building, Benkenstadt's bookstore, the longest running bookstore, Yiddish bookstore in the world. That is a scene, a sort of whimsical scene above it to the right of babies in DP camps, representing the kind of crucible of the DP camp era for Yiddish scholars and Yiddish books and Yiddishism in a sense. So we have Charles Darwin on the ramp. The second from left book is a translation of Darwin, and next to it is Harry Potter, I think. So we've conceived of this as a set of books and a sort of pictogram of the world that both speak to this idea of a very expansive, curious, outward-facing culture. Again, overturning your expectations, perhaps from the moment you come in, right? This is not shtetl nostalgia. It is a very sophisticated, very alert, very, very broad-ranging culture. All right. Next, oh, that's just a little set of some of the books on the ramp. So again, speaking to this idea of global and multifaceted, we have a really serious heavyweight study of modern China on the bottom left, a book written after the author's journey to China in the 1930s. We have an Arabic Yiddish primer on the top right. That's a book that was specifically produced for British soldiers in the First World War serving in Mandate Palestine. And there's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, bottom right. So we really span 100 years from the Arabic Yiddish primer, 1918, to the, I think, 2020 or thereabouts Harry Potter book. And a really remarkable book on the top left, In the Land of Race Discrimination, which is a communist sort of polemic against structural racism in the United States. All right, next up. And again, stories that privilege, color, extraordinary modern art. This is a set of really wonderful books that I think allow us to sort of reinterpret the contribution of Jewish women artists and writers to the story of Jewish modernism. This is a set of books produced in Lodz, Poland in 1921. It's a trilogy. The art for this one is by Dina Matus, who's primarily a theater person, designer, and so on. We have two other books forming the trilogy. So not enough time really to go into any detail on that, but come and see the full story and the full beauty of these books when you come here. Next up, so closely allied to color is the idea of scale. As we planned this process, and Lisa, you know this better than anyone because you were really pushing this, and rightly so, the sizing of the images got bigger and bigger as we sort of designed and pushed our way through. And by this last section, which is the press and politics section, we really have some glorious 2-meter high images. Girls on strikers on a May Day demonstration on the left, there are two of them, but you just see one. With a banner against child slavery, Kindersklaverei. On the right is an enigmatic figure. We don't know his name, but he's gloriously wearing a costume, perhaps for a Purim ball or something of that sort, made up of the names of 3 Yiddish newspapers in New York. And then this rather more intimate, atmospheric photograph in the middle of Rachel Lenski, I think she is, reading Der Vilna Tog, the newspaper in Vilna in the 1930s. So finding images that we could, blow up to this size, that confront you, that look at you, that engage you, that hold your eye as you look at them, these are kind of priceless. And so we spent a lot of time looking for those pictures that really make that immediate connection. And the next, so this is another example. And of course, all of these pictures tell other stories and, do other work within the exhibition. This is a 2-meter high photo of the site that greeted survivors and returning journalists of the Warsaw Ghetto after the uprising of 1943 and its crushing by the Germans, leaving the entire center of the capital just a sea of dust and stone. And this unknown figure of the girl on the right who's gazing down over it. And then in the case, we have a couple of books, and the one on the right is written shortly after the war ended by someone who has just fought in the ghetto uprising, Die letzte Tag von Warschauer Ghetto. No Yiddish type available at that point I think it's produced in Munich in a DP camp. So it's set using Latin letters. So a complex story built up really, but with this photo at its core, this extraordinary photo. And Polish journalists have spent decades trying to establish this girl's identity, so far without success. Another extraordinary photo next up is this wonderful, wonderful picture of Esther Rochel Kaminska and her daughter Ida Kaminska, two giants of the Yiddish theater, both acclaimed actors and directors. They worked together from the moment that Ida Kaminska, the daughter, was 2 or 3. But this photo I find just so glorious. I mean, they were very close, but you can see it so beautifully represented in this photo. It's possibly the last picture ever taken of them. Esther Rochel, the mother, is dying of cancer. She dies a year later. She's in a sanatorium in Vienna. I worked with the librarian Rachel Mizrati at the National Library of Israel, where this original photo is, to sort of tease out this story, which, again, I think it's the first time really this photo has been explained and explored in this way, and it has the longest single caption in the exhibition because it's just such an extraordinary story as recounted by Ida Kaminska in her memoir of the moment they last act together on stage. And maybe you're able to read it if you're seeing this on a big screen here, and you can find the program afterwards if you want to and read it back. I won't read it in full now, but it's just an incredibly touching story that gives a kind of whole extra dimension to this really beautiful photograph. So as I say, these, that was an absolutely crucial starting point for a lot of the selections we made, was just finding these kind of great stories. All right, one last similarly powerful image, which really doesn't need a story because it's just a glorious, poetic, beautiful image. This is in a section called Women's Voices, which is really the gender politics of Yiddish. And the picture shows Bluma Lempel, the story writer, on a family trip up the Hudson Valley in the 1950s. And it was something that actually Lisa and I found together. We went to visit her son, Paul Lempel. Sadly, he's just died. Was a tremendous help to the center in many ways. And we were looking through his family snaps, and this 4x3-inch photo, was there. He turned the page. We said, hang on, turn the page back. That is it. That is an exceptional photo, very unusual, and just allows us to sort of make a point that, well, I could interpret it in the way I see it, but I'll leave you to sort of imagine perhaps its poetry and its function within this section, which is really about the struggle that women faced from the 19th century onwards, and especially around the 1920s and 30s, to sort of prise open the gates of Yiddish literary culture and the editorial offices, and to actually get their work published, and more than that, get it recognized for what it was. All right, next. So if you work at the British Museum or the Met or the MFA in Boston or any big museum, generally speaking, you're spoiled for choice. Your exhibitions probably just raid your store houses. You bring in works on loan. That is the sort of starting point. That is not what happened here. That could never be our process, because we were never set up to collect items and artifacts with a view to opening this type of exhibition. So by and large, what the center has are remarkable collections of books, but somewhat random, haphazard collections of books, because everything we have has been donated. We've never gone out to create a sort of rare book collection or anything of that sort. There are also other collections like the sheet music we saw. We now have the world's largest collections of typewriters, Yiddish typewriters. And we also, it turns out, have possibly the world's most important collection of Yiddish wood and metal types, certainly the world's most diverse collection, and again, entirely sort of randomly built up. So thinking through the exhibition became also a kind of process of thinking through everything we had here and how we were going to use it, how we were going to use books, how we were going to use reproductions, because a lot of what we show on the walls is photographs that have come from elsewhere. But finding key objects that would enable us to tell a powerful story became really an obsession over the 5 years we were planning this. And here is one of them, and I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's an extraordinary object. It's it's over a meter high. It's a meter and a bit high. It came to us in the condition you see on the left, and it now sits in a beautiful frame in the condition you see on the right, and it is a micrograph, a portrait made up of tiny Hebrew or Yiddish letters. And in this case, it's a portrait of Chaim Zhitlowski, the towering sort of intellectual, activist, socialist of the late 19th and early 20th century. And it came from Buenos Aires. It was created by a textile weaver, a factory worker, Polish immigrant to Argentina, whose passion was creating these just incredibly complex, elaborate portraits. It's an original, it's a one-off, it's hand-drawn over many, many months. And it's really a glorious thing, and it sits as a centerpiece in our section on celebrities, which is really about the concept of celebrity and how it emerged in the Yiddish world around the turn of the century through picture postcards and so on. But you know, these kind of artifacts tell you something about the reverence for the culture and for its creators that its readers and consumers had. It's a really extraordinary piece. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So objects, here's another one, the next image, which is this wonderful display of a 1920s leather steamer trunk that went round the world twice in the possession of Peretz Hirschbein and Esther Shumiacha Hirschbein, a star couple, a power couple of the Yiddish literary world. They meet when he's about 38, she's about 19, and they marry and set off. They resume Hirschbein's traveling lifestyle, which he's already had for about a decade, and they set off around the world, and especially spending time in East Asia. They're very, very curious and serious students of Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, and other cultures. And so what you see in this little exhibit are their souvenir artifacts, gifts that were given to them, and so on. And then let's flip to the next slide. And this is Jessica Hirschbein, the daughter-in-law who donated the trunk, the objects, the clothes, the souvenirs, many things. We relied so heavily on the generosity of wonderful donors like Jessica and others to really create an exhibition that had objects at its center. So that was a big part of the process. You know, they pack just a unique sort of sense of wonder and just that experience of being able to see the actual steamer trunk, the micrograph, the objects that people had. It's really, there's nothing that rivals it. So what is next? Yeah, so that's sort of in a way the sort of, I guess, the sensory aspects of this whole process, which are really crucial. And then you obviously have the more kind of intellectual and literary and conceptual sort of sets of thinking that go alongside it. And one of the most obvious for us, and it's something that I think people enjoy realizing when they come here, is the way in which this exhibition puts women both as creators and as readers and consumers right at the center of this story. And that sort of seems like an obvious thing to do now. It's not how the story of Yiddish culture was told through the generations. And so in a way, you know, creating this exhibition at this particular moment allowed us to tap into the changing way people see this subject and are shaping this subject, the scholars, the performers, the translators, the publishers. You know, there's a whole process of reevaluation and rediscovery that makes it a very exciting time to position an exhibition like this, hopefully as part of that process, not just something that reflects it, but hopefully in its own way sort of pushes it forward. So this is just one of 16 separate small cases that are embedded in between the books. We call them story cases. They each tell a different story. And this one picks out three authors, three writers. That is Miriam Karpilov at the top. Below, that's actually Karpilov's book. So that's a photograph of Karpilov, probably retouched by her. She worked as a photographic retoucher as well as a writer. And that is her book, Das Tagebuch von einem elenden Mädel, The Diary of a Lonely Girl. And Shattering the Glass Ceiling is the title of this story. Why? Because it tells a very particular moment, which is the moment that authors like this find their books or make their books become published as hardcover books. Not serialized in newspapers, not a story in a journal, but actually a book with their name on it. That happens, you know, hundreds of years after it's happening for men, and it happens around 1910, 12, 14. And this is one of the key books that reflect that. And sort of realizing that, prompted by somebody bringing a beautiful copy of this Diary of a Lonely Girl, which is a rare book. It doesn't often look like this, but actually seeing it come in one day and realizing it had this beautiful cover sort of made me realize you could tell this story through this book and those of Rochel Feigenberg and Sora Raisin, who are the other figures on the panel on the left, did alongside it their books. The trio of books sit in the case, and then the stories slot in alongside it. Okay, next, women are also heavily represented in the story of Yiddish theater, and in this section in the Yiddish theater exhibit, which is its own sort of Holocaust memorial section, but specifically for the theater. So we picked out 10 actors. Most of them were women. Most of the photos came from the Ghetto Fighters House Museum in Israel, an extraordinary collection of hundreds and hundreds of Polish Yiddish actors, publicity photos collected by another actor, saved miraculously during the war and brought to Israel and put in the archive. They're all digitized online. You can look them up on the Ghetto Fighters Museum website. I find them mesmerizing. There are literally hundreds of them, and they capture these star names, cabaret singers, headlining actors, really at the height of their careers. And I think as they would have wanted us to remember them. A large number of these pictures, you'll see when you come here and read the captions, they end place and date of death unknown. That is the lot of the Yiddish actor in Central Europe during the war. All right. Another way in which we sort of confront, I think, the traditional way this story has been told is to push the boundaries geographically, to really spread our net, not just to Central and Eastern Europe and not just to North America and Canada, but south to Argentina and then to Shanghai and to all sorts of places, including Cairo. So these are two. So I've been on the staff here for, 7 years now. In that time, I've come across 3 books which have stamps from Cairo. And these are 2 of them. That is on the left, Braunschweig's Epicerie Zion. So he's a grocer and a Yiddish book lending library guy. And on the right, it's the Literarische und Dramatische Zirkel, the Literary and Dramatic Circle. So then on the next picture, you actually see, Lisa, this is another story case. So those are the books. We enlarge the stamps so you can read them easily, but we also put a photograph of the Literarische und Dramatische Circle in 1916. That is a bunch of Ashkenazi Jews working and living in Cairo who are devoted to Yiddish literature and theater. And they're all wearing ribbons memorializing Sholem Aleichem and Peretz, who die within a year of each other at this time. So this is a particular story about Yiddish in Cairo that you might not expect. And then on the next picture, another scene from the mural. This is the celebrated figure of songwriter, singer, troubadour Hevel Katz in Argentina, a Polish immigrant. He creates and sings these extraordinary mashups of Spanish and Yiddish. Absolutely beloved figure whose funeral draws 30,000 people onto the streets of Buenos Aires. And I'll flick quickly through the rest. We're almost done. And so how to treat the sort of contemporary story of Yiddish? Well, what we do is we weave it in around the historical stories for the most part. So on the mural, this is the Young Yiddish Library in Tel Aviv, founded in 1993 by my friend, the wonderful actor, singer, writer, activist, film star, Mendy Khan. Unique space of its own. And then on the next, another way in which we sort of bring the contemporary story of Yiddish in conversation with its roots. This is in the Holocaust section. One of 4 personalities we feature is the story writer Rochel Brochus. This is the only known photograph of her on the left. Next to it is a still from an animated film created 3 or so years ago by Alona Bach, a wonderful young Yiddishist, who took one of Brochus's stories, Die Zoggerin, the woman prayer sayer, and made an extraordinary animated film from it, which you can find on YouTube. We also added in a memorial for Brochus to an 8-volume edition of her work that would have appeared had it not been for the war, but never did. So in a sense, it's it's a sort of complex story. I'm happy to speak more about it if we have time. And finally, 2 more ways in which we do this. This is 125 years apart, 2 stories of cross-dressing and gender bending in the Yiddish theater. This is Mary Wilensky on the left, 1900s New York, a role normally played by a man in the Die Zwei Kunilemmels, the 2 Kunilemmels, a Goldfaden play, a sort of comedy of mistaken identity. But Wilensky is playing one of the roles, partnering a man. She's playing the other role herself. Gender bending was very common in the Yiddish theater at that period. And on the right, that's Michal Yashinsky as Die Bobbe Yachna. In the Goldfaden play, the Kishifmacherin, the Sorceress, that's a Volksbühne production of recent years. And the final picture, we have a tray, a drawer of contemporary Yiddish zines. Fleischik, a fat Jewish zine. In the middle, the story of Irena Kleppfisch. And on the right, a Briefelefarer Transdijk by J. Saper, Letter for a Transdijk. I always think of the Briefele der Mamen. Those of you know that sheet music, these echoes of sort of artifacts of Yiddish culture through the years. So we really try to reflect this kind of renaissance, this exciting moment that we're in with contemporary creativity in Yiddish. And that, I think, is the end of my presentation, and hopefully gives you just a bit of insight into some of the sort of key ways that guided us through the creation of this really rather enormous exhibit. It's kind of a museum in its own right. And I'll be very, very happy to take any questions and explore some of this in more detail.
Thank you, thank you. And I will start tossing questions your way. Can you tell me approximately when The Forwards was outselling the New York Times? Curious how long into the large immigration to US this would have happened.
I think it's in the 1920s, and I think at that point it's selling 270,000 daily. And, bearing in mind that the forwards is coming out really across America and probably across the world, has subscribers everywhere. But crucially, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, all have offices, presses, all produce a daily paper with some local content. And so it is as a quote on the wall in that section says, it was the Bible in many Jewish households. So that's the point at which it's outselling the New York Times.
Famous for not being able to have great pronunciation. Why did you choose Beikenstadt?
Benkenstadt. Well, there are 35 pictures on Benkenstadt is the Jewish bookstore in Cape Town. So radical selection is the name of the game. I mean, we wanted this mural to be global, so to tap as many bases of the culture as possible. You could choose an ostrich farm to represent South Africa. You could choose all sorts of things that would reflect race, the engagement with race in South Africa, which was a big theme of Yiddish writing. But I wanted there to be a bookstore. Well, there are two in a sense. I mean, the Yiddish Book Center is on that mural, but we're not a bookstore. But Benkenstadt's runs from 1905, I think, to 2008. Has an extraordinary run. It sent a lot of books here when it closed. It was an absolutely central institution in South African Yiddish life and Jewish life, and so I think it holds its own. It's a reasonable thing to put up there, and try and think how it was that a family-run Yiddish bookstore survived over 100 years in Cape Town, where that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world.
Is the Zhirlovsky micrograph portrait a recognizable text?
Yeah, the Zhirlovsky micrograph is very much a recognizable text. So pretty much anytime somebody created a portrait micrograph, whether that's Theodor Herzl, whether it's an emperor or Queen Victoria, or all these people were featured in micrographs, and certainly Shalom Aleichem and Goldfaden and Gordon, the playwright, and some others. The writer uses a text that relates to the person and, as far as possible, is by the person. So Gedalia Tannenbaum, the weaver artist, took several texts by Zhirlovsky, and he actually has a sort of rubric in the bottom of the piece that tells you exactly which texts he's chosen, and they are 3 or 4 Zhirlovsky essays, as I recall.
And a question about the micrograph is, the restoration, was it done in-house?
So it took about 18 months. This all was happening during COVID. It took, as I recall, at least 18 months from finding out that the micrograph even existed, building the relationship with Gedalia's daughter, to the point where she was very happy to donate it and understand it was going to be in the exhibit. Getting it over here took many months, complicated legal documents and the like. And it arrived, and then it went to the conservator in Vermont. Carolyn Frieser works on paper, studio in Vermont. She was and is our go-to conservator, does wonderful, wonderful work. And I think it was with her, it was about 2 years, Lisa, or thereabouts.
Yeah.
It underwent numerous cleanings, soakings in vats of chemicals. And then emerged sort of totally transformed, and Lisa took charge of the framing, and then it looks beautiful. It's stunning.
Well, here's a fun question. Was a parrot studio created? Tell us about that.
Was a parrot studio
We didn't
created?
plant that question.
Yes. So my great-grandfather, some of you will know this, is Sholem Asch, the writer, playwright, novelist, writer. Asch was, from 1899, as a 19-year-old, a central figure in the circle around Yitzhak Leibush Peretz, the towering central figure of Jewish Warsaw, of Polish Yiddish culture. So I had always been intrigued by the phenomenon that was the Peretz Salon, that he ran for about 25 years in his modest apartment, actually 2 addresses in central Warsaw, through which hundreds and hundreds of creative youngsters passed. And this, to me, it's always felt like a sort of Harlem Renaissance moment in modern Jewish culture. It utterly transformed the thing in the way that the Harlem Renaissance transforms Black America. And so how to make this manifest? So I love this idea of trying to recreate and suggest something of the atmosphere of the Peretz Salon. So we actually built a room in as part of the exhibit. Lisa and I were a lot of fun acting as the sort of scenic, I don't know, what would you call it, Lisa? Dressers? I don't know,
Yes.
something of that sort.
We collected a lot of things. We were the
Collected a lot of
decorators.
things, framed a lot of images, and you walk in, you step over Peretz's threshold, you see him behind his desk. His desk has real Warsaw 1900s Shabbos candlesticks and other bits and pieces that are true to life. But it recreates the space and hopefully gives you a sense of this extraordinary sort of laboratory of modern Jewish culture, this really exciting moment.
What was the name of the actress you showed an old and young picture of toward the beginning? I think it's the first one.
The writer, right? Is it Aliza Grinblatt, I guess? Yeah.
No,
Uh,
actress. The beautiful cabinet card.
oh, Neroslavska in
Yeah.
Kiev. That
Yes.
one. So the Goldfaden, the actress is Shalamis is Neroslavska. She's either Esther or Nadia Neroslavska. Had a sort of checkered, troubled career. Was considered a great star by people who saw her. Never promoted really to her due. So if that's what the question has in mind, it's Neroslavska, and it's the Raphael studio in Kiev in 1908.
What was the relationship between Yiddish theater and Broadway?
Yeah, very close. I mean, they were separate, but they were also intertwined and closely connected. There were many stars who had big careers on both. Molly Picon is an obvious name. Jacob Buloff, Ben Army, Jacob Adler, so many. There was a time when Broadway looked to Second Avenue and the Yiddish theater for creativity and modernism. There are numerous stories of the sort of New York theater elite going to Second Avenue Yiddish theaters to see the latest in European drama and staging and scene design and set design. So they have a very close relationship. And the biggest stars in the Yiddish theater oftentimes were earning more than the biggest stars on Broadway. They filled 3,000 seat theaters on Second Avenue, and in the Bowery, just as they did people did on Broadway. So they're sort of parallel. The Yiddish, Tin Pan Alley has its parallel phenomenon in Yiddish theater composition and sheet music. I think of them as separate but overlapping.
Curious whether you added a memorial to the murder of so many of the Yiddish writers murdered by Stalin in 1952.
So we do. We have a section that I didn't show called Soviet Yiddish. It absolutely, the core of it is this really sort of agonizing, anguished story of what happens from the mid-30s and especially through the late 40s into the Night of the Murdered Poets, so-called, in 1952. So that is told in some detail in that section. We have the entire set of mugshots of the 13 writers and others who were murdered in 1952, but we also tell the sort of pre-story, especially through two of them, Peretz Markish and Shlomi Michoels. Markish a writer, Michoels a theater guy. They were very closely connected, they were friends. Michoels is murdered in 48 in a staged automobile accident. Markish is among those shot in 1952. So yes, we do tell that story in a lot of detail.
Um, is there anything about the Yiddish-speaking community in Canada? Is the newspaper Canada Adler mentioned?
There's quite a lot about Canada. We have the best picture I found of a composing room of linotype machines is actually a picture of the Canada Adler, the Canada Eagle newspaper. So that is possibly even our largest single reproduction, maybe rivaling the Girls on the May Day protest. That sits as a backdrop to our Yiddish linotype machine. And there are many, many other photographs and writers and books from Canada. Yes, there are.
Can you repeat the name of the animator of the Rachel Brackus story?
Yeah, so her name is Alona Bach, Alona Bach. And if you Google Alona Bach and Yiddish, you will probably pretty quickly pull up the animated film on YouTube, which is called Die Zogerin, Zogerin. Zogerin was a professional prayer sayer, and it's an amazing story written in the early 20th century, a really dark, sort of embittered story about an embittered character. This is a poor woman who's forced to earn her living sitting out in the cemetery all day, saying prayers for wealthier people who can't be bothered to turn up, basically. And that's her life's work. And it sort of drives her crazy, and the injustice and the pittance they pay her. And she has this sort of epic kind of meltdown at the end of the story. And Alona's created this video and recites and acts the part, and it's just powerful stuff.
I'm going to give you two more. Tell us about the Yiddish typewriters, please.
So yeah, Yiddish typewriters, everybody loves typewriters. Typewriters are glorious things. So I was a little shocked, frankly, when I came here in 2017 to find the typewriters in less than a totally loved up state. And at that point, we had about 25, and I sort of quickly decided we were going to give them some love. And a bunch of fellows, Ada and Sophia and successive fellows really embraced this project, and we renovated them all. We gave them all archive boxes. We researched them. We solicited more. We now have about 50, and they run through the decades. And they are a beautiful case with, how many do we put in there? 27, I think, in the case, in their own brightly lit case in the middle of the exhibit, full of stories. Aaron Lansky's thesis was typed on one, so Aaron's typewriter sits in pride of place with other writers, but crucially also not just writers, you know, so-called ordinary folk, regular folk, often extraordinary people in their own right. The people who, the sort of glue of this culture is always the working class circles and communities of sustainers and readers. So that is, you know, those people are in dialogue with the sort of starrier names throughout this whole exhibit. It's so in that sense, you know, it tells a cultural story in the round. Which is, I think, again, true to the subject. But yes, the typewriters are wonderful. We have one that sits at a desk where you can actually type away yourself and type in Yiddish. And it's just fun to watch, you know, children, teenagers, younger people who have never sat at a typewriter, don't know how to feed the paper in. I mean, I honestly struggle with it, although I did use typewriters at the beginning of my journalistic career, bizarrely. But it's a fun part of the exhibit.
Okay, and here's a great one for us to end on. Would that we could rest on 5 years of working on an exhibition. Will there be a published catalog of the exhibit?
Ah, well, funny that question should be asked. Yes, there will. Um, if it doesn't kill us both first. Uh, we are hard at work on a blockbuster, I think it's fair to say. Lisa,
Doorstop
yes?
of a, yes.
A what?
A doorstop, as
A
we say in
doorstop, a
publishing.
doorstop of a book,
Big,
yes.
very big.
Yeah, a big, glossy, colorful, picture heavy, but also with a lot of text, beautiful book that will tell this whole story in as much as we can get into 300 odd pages. And we hope and intend and plan for that to be out by around this time next year. But we're hard at work on it, and it's already looking majestic, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you so much. This has been, I think it's fair to say from some of the comments, which I didn't read, a great introduction to the exhibition. For all of you in the virtual theater this evening, I know I speak for both David and myself when I say, come, visit, see it for yourself. You can spend a day, you can spend hours, but we promise that you'll be entertained and enlightened. And we also ask that you say hello to us both when you come. So do plan a visit to learn more about how to visit, yiddishbookcenter.org/visit. You can also visit us on the Bloomberg Connects app and see for yourself more about the exhibition. I want to thank this evening's producer behind the scenes who made this all possible, Mia Pope. Much thanks. Thanks to all of our members whose work and whose support makes all of our ongoing work possible. You can learn about how you can provide support at yiddishbookcenter.org/donate. You'll find information on how to renew your membership, how to give a gift membership, or become a sustaining giver. I hope you'll consider joining us in person if you're in the neighborhood, Sunday, December 5th, this coming Sunday at 2 p.m. for How the Holocaust Changed the Yiddish Language with Hannah Pauline Galai. You can register for the online virtual program or just drop by and join us in our real theater Sunday, December 15th at 2 p.m. Learn more about that event, register, and see our full calendar of upcoming events at yiddishbookcenter.org/events. Thanks again for joining us this evening. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and we look forward to welcoming you back. Thanks.